Our house, nestled in the heart of Oakwood Estates, was a picture of suburban bliss. A two-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn, a swing set in the backyard where our children, Emily and Thomas, would shriek with laughter, and a golden retriever named Buddy who greeted me at the door each evening with enthusiastic tail wags. Inside, polished hardwood floors gleamed under the soft glow of the chandelier, and the aroma of freshly baked cookies often wafted from the kitchen. My wife, Vivian, had a knack for creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. She was a vision of domestic elegance, always dressed impeccably, her auburn hair perfectly coiffed, a smile gracing her lips. We were the envy of our neighbors, the couple everyone admired, the family everyone wanted to emulate. I, Mark, was a successful investment banker, my days filled with the adrenaline rush of high-stakes deals and the satisfaction of building a secure future for my family. Vivian, a former art history major, had gracefully transitioned into the role of homemaker, dedicating her time to raising our children and managing our household. It was a partnership, a carefully constructed balance of responsibilities and shared goals. We had built this life together, brick by brick, and on the surface it was flawless. Or so I thought. Our evenings followed a predictable rhythm. Dinner at 7, followed by homework help for the kids, maybe a shared glass of wine on the patio while we discussed our day, and then, if we weren't too tired, a movie or a book before bed. It was comfortable, familiar, a routine that had become as natural as breathing. Yet, lately, a subtle unease had begun to creep into my consciousness. It was nothing I could put my finger on, just a nagging feeling that something was amiss. Vivian seemed distant. Her smiles, though still present, lacked their usual warmth. Her eyes, once sparkling with life, now held a shadow of something I couldn't quite decipher. She'd become less talkative, her responses to my questions short and clipped. When I tried to bridge the gap, asking if anything was troubling her, she'd simply brush it off, attributing her mood to stress or fatigue. I attributed it to the pressures of managing a household and raising 2 young children. Vivian was a perfectionist, and I knew she placed a lot of pressure on herself to maintain the pristine image of our family life. I tried to be understanding, offering to take on more responsibilities, suggesting we take a weekend getaway to reconnect. But my offers were met with polite declinations, a subtle resistance that left me feeling more confused than ever. I pushed the unsettling thoughts to the back of my mind, focusing on my work, on providing for my family, on maintaining the facade of our perfect life. I told myself I was imagining things, that everything was fine. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something was terribly wrong. The art studio, a quaint little building nestled in the heart of the town's historic district, was Vivian's sanctuary. She had always possessed a creative spirit, a passion for art that had been dormant for years, buried beneath the responsibilities of motherhood and domestic life. I had encouraged her to rekindle that passion, believing it would be a healthy outlet for her creativity. She had joined a weekly painting class a few months prior, and I was pleased to see her rediscover that part of herself. She would come home from her classes energized, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm as she described the techniques she was learning and the camaraderie she shared with her fellow students. The instructor, a man named Julian, was, from what Vivian had told me, a charismatic and talented artist. He had a reputation for inspiring his students, for unlocking their hidden potential. I had never met him, but I had envisioned him as an older, bohemian type, a gentle soul with a passion for art. I was wrong. One evening, I decided to surprise Vivian by picking her up from her class. I arrived a few minutes early and waited outside the studio, admiring the quaint building with its large windows and the soft glow of light spilling out onto the street. As I waited, I noticed a figure leaning against the doorway, smoking a cigarette. It was a man, tall and slender, with a mop of dark hair that fell across his forehead. He had a brooding, intense look about him, a look that seemed out of place in the peaceful setting of the art studio. This, I would later learn, was Julian. When Vivian emerged from the studio, her face lit up when she saw me. She introduced me to Julian, who greeted me with a polite but somewhat distant nod. There was something about him that made me uneasy. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to assess me, to penetrate my carefully constructed facade. He had a way of looking at Vivian, a subtle intensity in his gaze that made me uncomfortable. I dismissed my feelings as paranoia, attributing them to my own insecurities. As we walked back to the car, Vivian chattered excitedly about her class, describing the painting she was working on, a landscape bathed in the warm light of the setting sun. I listened attentively, but my mind was still replaying the scene at the studio, the way Julian had looked at Vivian, the subtle shift in her demeanor when he was near. I tried to shake off my unease, reminding myself that I was being ridiculous. Vivian was simply rediscovering her passion for art, and Julian was just her instructor. There was nothing more to it, or so I desperately wanted to believe. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to sprout in the fertile ground of my subconscious. The weeks that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. On the surface, life continued as normal. I went to work, Vivian took care of the children, we attended social gatherings, and maintained the image of the perfect couple. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a silent tension was brewing. My suspicions about Vivian and Julian continued to fester, growing stronger with each passing day. I found myself scrutinizing her every move, analyzing her every word. I noticed the way she would linger on the phone, her voice hushed and secretive. I noticed the new perfume she was wearing, a subtle floral scent that was distinctly different from her usual fragrance. I noticed the way she would sometimes flinch when I touched her, as if my touch was unwelcome. My work began to suffer. I couldn't concentrate, my mind constantly preoccupied with thoughts of Vivian and Julian. I found myself snapping at colleagues, making careless mistakes. My boss, a shrewd and observant man, noticed the change in my demeanor. He called me into his office one afternoon, his expression a mixture of concern and disapproval. "Mark," he said, his voice grave, "you're not yourself lately. You're distracted, making errors you wouldn't normally make. Is there something going on at home? Something you want to talk about?" I hesitated, unsure how to respond. I couldn't confide in him, couldn't reveal the turmoil that was consuming me. I mumbled something about stress and fatigue, offering a weak apology for my recent performance. He didn't seem convinced, but he let it go, warning me that I needed to get my act together. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening to Vivian's soft breathing beside me. I felt a chasm growing between us, a gulf of unspoken words and hidden emotions. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but fear held me back. Fear of what I might discover, fear of the truth shattering the fragile illusion of our perfect life. Instead, I retreated further into myself, becoming more withdrawn and irritable. I started working late, using work as an escape from the tension at home. I found myself seeking solace in the bottom of a whiskey glass, the alcohol numbing the pain, if only temporarily. Vivian, sensing my withdrawal, seemed to grow even more distant. Our conversations became strained, filled with awkward silences and veiled accusations. The once warm and inviting atmosphere of our home was replaced by a chilling coldness, a sense of impending doom. The foundation of our marriage was crumbling, the shifting sands threatening to swallow us whole. The insidious nature of doubt is its ability to twist even the most mundane occurrences into evidence of betrayal. Every late meeting Vivian had, every unanswered phone call, every time she rushed out the door with a vague excuse, it all fueled the fire of suspicion burning within me. My mind, once a bastion of logic and reason, was now a battlefield where doubt and denial waged war. One evening, while searching for a misplaced document in Vivian's study, I stumbled upon a small, leather-bound journal tucked away in a drawer. Curiosity, that relentless siren, urged me to open it. The pages were filled with Vivian's elegant script, a mix of daily reflections, grocery lists, and reminders for upcoming events. As I flipped through the pages, a date caught my eye, the date I had surprised her at the art studio. Beneath the date, a single line, written in a shaky hand. "Julian's eyes hold a universe I long to explore." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The blood drained from my face, my hands trembling as I reread the sentence, as if hoping the words would magically rearrange themselves into something less damning. But they remained, a stark confession of her attraction to another man. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I had to clutch the edge of the desk to steady myself. Suddenly, everything clicked into place: the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the distant demeanor, the new perfume. It was all so obvious now, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together to form a picture I didn't want to see. The journal slipped from my grasp, landing on the floor with a soft thud. I sank into the chair, my mind reeling, my heart pounding in my chest. The betrayal was profound, cutting deeper than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just the physical act of infidelity that wounded me. It was the deception, the lies, the erosion of trust that had been the foundation of our marriage. The woman I loved, the woman I had built a life with, had become a stranger, her heart occupied by another. I spent the rest of the night in a daze, the journal's words echoing in my mind. Sleep was a distant impossibility. I paced the floorboards creaking beneath my restless steps. I stared out the window at the moonlit garden, the once familiar landscape now imbued with a sense of foreboding. The world I thought I knew had been shattered, replaced by a chilling reality I was only beginning to grasp. The corrosive whisper of doubt had become a deafening roar, consuming me, leaving me hollow and broken. The days that followed were a surreal exercise in deception. I wore a mask of normalcy, pretending that everything was fine, while inside, I was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Rage, hurt, betrayal, and a chilling sense of detachment battled for dominance within me. I functioned on autopilot, going through the motions of my daily life, interacting with Vivian and the children as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The way I looked at Vivian, the way I touched her, the way I spoke to her. It was all different now. There was a distance between us, an invisible barrier erected by her betrayal. I found myself observing her with a detached curiosity, as if she were a stranger, a fascinating specimen under my microscope. I studied her mannerisms, her expressions, searching for clues, for any sign of remorse or guilt. But I found none. She seemed oblivious to my inner turmoil, content in her deception. The children, thankfully, remained unaware of the tension that crackled between us. Their innocence was a shield, protecting them from the ugliness of adult emotions. I made a conscious effort to maintain a sense of normalcy for their sake, forcing myself to smile, to engage in their games, to tuck them into bed with a kiss and a bedtime story. They were my anchor, the one constant in a world that had been turned upside down. At work, I threw myself into my projects with renewed vigor. The complexities of finance provided a welcome distraction from the emotional chaos of my personal life. I worked late into the night, fueled by caffeine and a desperate need to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home. My colleagues, sensing my intensity, gave me a wide berth. I was grateful for their unspoken understanding, for the space they afforded me. But even in the midst of my work, Vivian's betrayal haunted me. Her words from the journal, "Julian's eyes hold a universe I long to explore," played on repeat in my mind, a constant reminder of her infidelity. The image of them together, their bodies entwined, their lips locked in a passionate embrace, seared itself into my brain, a recurring nightmare that woke me up in a cold sweat. I knew I couldn't continue living like this, pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I needed to confront Vivian, to demand answers, to make a decision about the future of our marriage. But the thought of confronting her filled me with dread. I was afraid of what I might say, afraid of what I might do. I was afraid of the truth, afraid of the pain it would inflict. So I continued to wear the mask of normalcy, hoping that somehow, someday, the pain would subside and the cracks in our marriage would magically mend themselves. But deep down, I knew that was just a wishful fantasy. Maintaining the facade of normalcy was becoming increasingly difficult. The strain of pretending that everything was fine was taking its toll. My sleep was plagued by nightmares, my days filled with a gnawing anxiety that I couldn't shake off. I was a tightly wound spring, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. One evening, as we were sitting down to dinner, I noticed Vivian's phone light up with a message. The name that flashed across the screen was Julian. My blood ran cold. I watched as she quickly glanced at the message, a subtle smile playing on her lips, before casually placing the phone face down on the table. The casualness of her actions, the blatant disregard for my feelings, ignited a fury within me that I could no longer contain. "Who is Julian?" I asked, my voice deceptively calm. Vivian looked up, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Julian? Oh, he's just someone from my art class," she replied, her voice a little too high-pitched. "Just someone from your art class?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "The someone whose eyes hold a universe you long to explore?" The blood drained from Vivian's face. She stared at me, her mouth agape, unable to speak. The mask of normalcy had slipped, revealing the fear and guilt that lay beneath. "Where did you hear that?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "It doesn't matter," I said, my voice rising. "The fact is, you're having an affair with him. You've been lying to me, to our children, to everyone." The dam had burst. All the pent-up anger, hurt, and betrayal poured out of me in a torrent of words. I confronted her with the evidence I had found, the journal, the late nights, the secretive phone calls. Vivian, initially defensive, eventually broke down, confessing to the affair. She tried to explain, to justify her actions, blaming my workaholic tendencies, my emotional unavailability, the monotony of our suburban life. But her words were just empty excuses, hollow attempts to shift the blame. The confrontation was explosive, a cathartic release of emotions that left us both drained and raw. In the aftermath, there was a chilling silence, a void where our love had once been. We sat there, staring at each other across the wreckage of our marriage, two strangers bound by a shared history and the shattered remnants of a life we had built together. The unraveling had begun. The carefully constructed facade of our perfect life had crumbled, revealing the ugly truth that lay beneath. We were left to pick up the pieces, to navigate the treacherous terrain of betrayal and heartbreak, unsure of where to go from here. The raw, visceral anger that had fueled the confrontation with Vivian gradually gave way to a chilling calmness. It was as if a switch had flipped inside me, replacing the fiery rage with a glacial resolve. I was no longer interested in recriminations, in assigning blame. My focus shifted from the pain of betrayal to the meticulous planning of retribution. I moved out of the house, taking up residence in a small apartment near my office. The separation was a necessary step, both for my own sanity and to give Vivian the space she needed to come to terms with the consequences of her actions. I continued to see the children regularly, cherishing the moments of normalcy they provided in the midst of the turmoil. They were my lifeline, the innocent victims in this adult drama, and I was determined to shield them from the fallout as much as possible. While outwardly I maintained a semblance of composure, inwardly I was consumed by a cold, calculating fury. I spent hours dissecting Vivian's betrayal, analyzing every detail, every lie, every stolen moment. I researched Julian, learning everything I could about him, his background, his career, his weaknesses. I was like a predator stalking its prey, patiently gathering information, biding my time, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. My work became my sanctuary, a place where I could channel my energy and focus into something productive. I immersed myself in complex financial models, the intricate details providing a welcome distraction from the emotional turmoil that raged within. My colleagues, sensing my renewed focus, were relieved. They attributed my change in demeanor to the separation, assuming I was finally moving on. Little did they know the true nature of my transformation. At night, when the city fell silent, I would sit in my apartment, a glass of whiskey in hand, meticulously plotting my revenge. I wasn't interested in a quick, impulsive act of retaliation. I wanted something more calculated, more precise, something that would inflict maximum damage, not just to Vivian and Julian, but to their reputations, their careers, their very sense of self. I wanted them to suffer the same slow, agonizing pain that I was enduring. The betrayal had awakened a dark side within me, a side I never knew existed. I was no longer the man I had been, the loving husband, the devoted father. I was something else now, something colder, harder, more ruthless. I was a man driven by a single-minded purpose, to exact revenge on those who had wronged me. And I would stop at nothing to achieve my goal. My plan was intricate, a carefully woven web designed to ensnare Vivian and Julian, to slowly tighten around them until they were suffocating in their own deceit. It was a game of chess, and I was playing the long game, anticipating their every move, countering their every action. My first target was Julian. I started subtly, planting seeds of doubt about his character, his professionalism, his integrity. I used my network of contacts, my influence in the business world, to spread rumors, to cast aspersions on his reputation. I anonymously tipped off the art school board about his inappropriate relationship with a student, highlighting the ethical violations and the potential damage to the school's reputation. I knew it wouldn't be enough to destroy him completely, but it was a start, a first crack in his carefully constructed facade. Then, I turned my attention to Vivian. I began to sow discord in her social circle, subtly manipulating conversations, planting seeds of suspicion about her trustworthiness, her loyalty, her character. I exploited her insecurities, her vulnerabilities, her deep-seated need for approval. I isolated her from her friends, her support system, leaving her alone and vulnerable. I maintained a facade of concern, feigning ignorance of her affair, offering her support and understanding. I played the role of the dutiful husband, the concerned father, all the while orchestrating her downfall. It was a cruel game, but I was driven by a cold, implacable fury. The pain of her betrayal was a constant ache, a burning ember that fueled my desire for revenge. Vivian, oblivious to my machinations, began to unravel. Her once vibrant social life dwindled, her friendships strained, her confidence shattered. She became withdrawn, suspicious, paranoid. The world she had known, the world she had taken for granted, was crumbling around her. She was trapped in a web of her own making, the consequences of her actions slowly but surely closing in on her. I watched her descent with a detached satisfaction. It was a perverse pleasure, a twisted sense of justice. She had betrayed my trust, shattered our family, and now she was paying the price. The first move had been made, the game was afoot, and I was determined to see it through to the end. With Julian's reputation tarnished and Vivian increasingly isolated, I escalated my campaign of revenge. I hired a private investigator to gather more concrete evidence of their affair, documenting their clandestine meetings, their secret rendezvous, their illicit conversations. The investigator's reports, filled with lurid details and photographic evidence, fueled my anger, but also provided me with the ammunition I needed to execute the next phase of my plan. I began to subtly sabotage Vivian's life, creating chaos and disruption wherever I could. I anonymously reported her to the tax authorities, alleging financial irregularities. I leaked embarrassing information about her past to local gossip blogs. I even orchestrated a minor car accident, ensuring that she was unharmed but shaken and inconvenienced. The cumulative effect of these actions was devastating. Vivian's life was spiraling out of control. She was facing scrutiny from the authorities, ostracized by her community, and plagued by a series of unfortunate events. Her once carefully curated image of perfection was shattered, replaced by a reputation tarnished by scandal and suspicion. Meanwhile, Julian's career was imploding. The art school, facing pressure from concerned parents and board members, launched an internal investigation into his conduct. His classes were canceled, his exhibitions postponed, his reputation in tatters. He became a pariah in the art community, shunned by his colleagues, avoided by his former admirers. I watched their downfall with a cold detachment, a sense of grim satisfaction. They were reaping what they had sown, their lives unraveling as a direct consequence of their actions. The net was tightening around them, the walls closing in. Their world, once filled with passion and illicit pleasure, was now a suffocating prison of their own making. Yet, even as I witnessed their suffering, a part of me felt a twinge of guilt. Was I going too far? Was my revenge becoming as destructive as the betrayal that had triggered it? I pushed these doubts aside, reminding myself of the pain they had inflicted on me, the damage they had done to my family. I was not a cruel man, but I had been pushed to my limits, and I would not rest until justice was served. The time had come to confront Vivian with the full extent of my knowledge and the consequences of her actions. I arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a quiet cafe away from the prying eyes of our community. She arrived looking haggard and anxious, the strain of the past few weeks etched on her face. The once vibrant and confident woman was now a shadow of her former self. I wasted no time on pleasantries. I laid out the evidence of her affair, the investigators' reports, the photographs, the documented conversations. I detailed the steps I had taken to dismantle her life, the subtle manipulations, the orchestrated misfortunes. I watched as the realization of my actions dawned on her, the color draining from her face, her eyes widening in horror. You did this?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," I replied, my voice cold and emotionless. "You destroyed our family, our life. This is what you deserve." Vivian broke down, tears streaming down her face, pleading for forgiveness, begging me to stop. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. I had moved beyond forgiveness, beyond reconciliation. The pain of her betrayal was too deep, the wound too raw. I presented her with a choice. Agree to a divorce on my terms, relinquishing all claims to our assets and custody of the children, or face the full consequences of her actions, including public exposure and potential legal repercussions. It was a cruel ultimatum, but I was beyond caring. I wanted her to understand the magnitude of her betrayal, the devastation she had wrought. Vivian, broken and defeated, agreed to my terms. The meeting ended with a chilling silence, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. As she walked away, her shoulders slumped, her head bowed in shame, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in knowing that she was paying the price for her actions, but there was also a profound sadness, a sense of loss for the life we had once shared, the love we had once cherished. The unveiling was complete. The mask had been removed, the truth exposed. Vivian had been confronted with the consequences of her choices, the devastating impact of her betrayal. The game was almost over, but the endgame was yet to be played. While my primary focus was on Vivian and Julian, I couldn't ignore the collateral damage their affair had inflicted. Our children, Emily and Thomas, were the innocent victims in this adult drama. Their world turned upside down by the implosion of their parents' marriage. Emily, our sensitive and perceptive daughter, was struggling to cope with the separation and the palpable tension between her parents. She withdrew into herself, her once bright and bubbly personality replaced by a quiet sadness. Thomas, our energetic and boisterous son, masked his confusion and hurt with anger, lashing out at his sister, his friends, even at me. I knew I had to do everything in my power to protect them, to shield them from the full extent of the pain and ugliness. I sought professional help, enrolling them in therapy sessions, providing them with a safe space to express their emotions and process their grief. I spent as much time as I could with them, engaging in their favorite activities, listening to their concerns, reassuring them of my unwavering love. It was a slow and difficult process, but gradually, I saw signs of healing. Emily began to open up, sharing her fears and anxieties with her therapist and with me. Thomas's anger subsided, replaced by a quiet sadness that he was finally able to express. They were resilient children, their love for each other and for their parents a powerful force that helped them navigate the turbulent waters of their parents' separation. Yet, I knew that the scars of their parents' betrayal would linger, a hidden burden they would carry with them throughout their lives. The innocence of childhood had been shattered, replaced by a premature awareness of the complexities and disappointments of adult relationships. It was a heavy price to pay, a collateral damage that I deeply regretted. I vowed to do everything in my power to make it up to them, to provide them with the stability, love, and support they needed to heal and thrive. They were my priority, my reason for being, and I would dedicate my life to ensuring their happiness and well-being. The betrayal had taken so much from us, but it would not take our children's future. While Vivian was reeling from the confrontation and the impending divorce, I turned my attention back to Julian. I had already damaged his reputation and career, but I wasn't finished yet. I wanted to expose him, to humiliate him, to make him pay for his role in the destruction of my family. I contacted a local journalist, a woman known for her investigative reporting and her penchant for uncovering scandals. I provided her with the evidence I had gathered, the details of Julian's affair with Vivian, the hypocrisy of his position as an art instructor preying on a vulnerable student. I knew the story would be irresistible, a salacious tale of betrayal and deceit that would capture the public's imagination. The article, when it was published, was a bombshell. It detailed Julian's affair with Vivian, naming names, exposing their secret rendezvous, painting him as a predator who had taken advantage of a married woman. The story went viral, spreading like wildfire across social media, becoming the talk of the town. Julian was crucified in the court of public opinion. He was condemned by his colleagues, ostracized by his community, his name synonymous with scandal and disgrace. The art school, facing mounting pressure, terminated his contract, effectively ending his career. He became a social pariah, shunned by everyone he knew, his life in ruins. I watched his downfall with a cold satisfaction. He had played with fire and gotten burned. He had betrayed my trust, violated my family, and now he was paying the price. The public spectacle of his humiliation was a fitting punishment, a public shaming that would forever tarnish his reputation. Yet, even as I savored his downfall, a part of me felt a twinge of unease. Was this what I had become? A man who reveled in the destruction of another human being? I pushed these doubts aside, reminding myself of the pain he had caused, the damage he had inflicted. He had brought this upon himself, and I would not shed a tear for his misfortune. With Vivian and Julian's lives in ruins, a strange quiet descended upon my own. The divorce was finalized, the legal battles concluded, the dust settled. I had achieved my objective, exacted my revenge, yet the victory felt hollow. The house, once filled with the sounds of family life, children's laughter, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of conversation, was now eerily silent. I wandered through the empty rooms, the ghosts of our past haunting every corner. The swing set in the backyard stood motionless, a silent reminder of happier times. Even Buddy, my faithful companion, seemed to sense the somber mood, his tail wags less enthusiastic, his barks less playful. The children were adjusting to their new reality, splitting their time between my apartment and Vivian's small rented house. They were brave, resilient, but I could see the sadness in their eyes, the lingering effects of their parents' broken promises. I tried to fill the void, to be both mother and father to them, but I knew I could never truly replace the family they had lost. My work, once a welcome distraction, now felt meaningless. The thrill of the deal, the satisfaction of success, had lost its luster. I went through the motions, but my heart wasn't in it. I found myself staring out the window of my office, lost in thought, replaying the events of the past months, questioning my choices, wondering if it had all been worth it. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of what I had lost. The love, the companionship, the shared dreams, all gone, replaced by a bitter emptiness. I had won the battle, but at what cost? The victory felt like a defeat, the revenge a Pyrrhic one. I was alone, adrift in a sea of regret and remorse. The echoes of silence reverberated through my life, a constant reminder of the irrevocable consequences of betrayal and revenge. I had destroyed the very thing I had sought to protect, and now I was left to pick up the pieces, to rebuild my life, to find a way to live with the ghosts of my past.